Welcome to this segment on Niners Radio 49. My special guest is for today is a man with no introduction. He's been the voice of the Green Bay Packers since 1999 on the Green Bay Packers radio network. He's been also, people forget, he also was the voice of the Chicago Bears back in the mid 80s doing the Walter Payton, Jim McMahon, Mike Ditka. We'll get into a little bit of that Packer Bears rivalry, but mainly we're going to be previewing the 49ers taking on the Green Bay Packers in the National Football Conference Divisional Playoff coming up this Saturday night. The kickoff time will be at 5:15 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That will be on Fox Sports. So, Wayne, welcome to Niners Radio 49, the voice of the Packers. How you doing?
Very good. How you doing?
So, coming off that big, shocking win last Sunday, knocking out the Dallas Cowboys. Nobody did not see that coming. The Green Bay Packers coming down to Big D, eliminating the Dallas Cowboys. Many people thought it was going to be the 49ers and Cowboys renewing their longtime rivalry, possible for the NFC Championship. It was obviously did not. The Green Bay Packers 48-32 win, and it was the Packers dominated the statistic, or no, it was the ground attack by the Green Bay Packers was the difference, and they were +2 in that giveaway turnover ratio, and it was the two big turnovers, including the big interception by Darnell Savage, 64-yard return for a touchdown, was the difference in the Packers' convincing win over the Dallas Cowboys, which, by the way, the Green Bay Packers, regardless, it doesn't matter if it's with or without Aaron Rodgers, the Packers have now beaten the Cowboys 10 of the last 11 meetings, including the postseason. Nobody see that coming, Wayne.
I didn't see 48 coming, that's for sure. I said to Tom Clemens, the quarterback's coach, as we got on the plane, I said, Tommy, the next time you're going to lay 48 on somebody, give me a little notice and I'll be a little more eloquent with my description of the game.
Yeah, I mean, nobody did not see that coming. I mean, the Packers, this was supposed to have been a rebuilding transitional year, life after Aaron Rodgers, and it looked like it was just it looks like the beat keeps on going with or without Aaron Rodgers. Just Jordan Love kid. Tell us more about this kid, Jordan Love. His final statistic numbers for the contest: he threw for 272 yards, 3 touchdowns, a 157.2 quarterback rating.
He's really a good kid. He came in here. He didn't ask to be drafted behind Aaron Rodgers, but he was. Spent 3 years behind Rodgers and didn't waste time. He learned from Aaron, and Aaron was very good with him, I might add. Aaron Rodgers has certainly something to do with the development of Jordan Love, and I think Jordan would be the first to tell you that. The thing about him is he, by sitting and waiting his time, he came into this season a little more mature than most first-year starters in the NFL. As you well know, quarterbacks in the NFL get drafted, and then it's only a matter of days before they're playing in a real game. And that's usually a recipe for disaster most of the time, not all
Right.
of the time. But, Aaron was very good with this kid, and he learned a lot from him. You see a lot of Aaron's game in Jordan Love, but it's also him. And he's taken ownership, and he's been, over the last 9 weeks, I want to say, unbelievable. 21 touchdown passes, 1 interception. I mean, those are Rodgers-like numbers in an MVP season.
21 1 touchdown interception ratio. Unbelievable. 21-1 a TD NIT ratio. That is very impressive. He got that IQ.
Yeah, I think he does. I think he sees the field well. Obviously, he works at his craft. I mean, he studies. He knows what's going on. But he's got great arm talent, and there's no doubt about that. And I think that the one question we had coming into this season was his accuracy. And as the season's gone along, his accuracy has improved greatly. And, right now he's playing it very well, and this team is playing, with a lot of confidence and momentum coming into this ball game because they've been in the playoffs for about a month. Okay, they had to win their last two regular season games just to qualify. So those are like playoff games, and
That's
now
right.
they go into Dallas, and the Cowboys. They were playing for a little something in that last week of the regular season, but not like what the Packers were going through. And I think that's kind of given this team that postseason mindset, and now they're playing with a certain amount of ease at the prospects of what's at stake.
Think about this in perspective. And hold on one second. Putting it back into perspective, the Packers going into this. I'm gonna just pull up some. I mean, this was supposed to have been a rebuilding year. Last year, it was the Packers being eliminated on the final day of the regular season. The Detroit Lions came in the Green Bay and winning it, and they won the division. And then, or knocked them out, won the division. This year, they're going to be playing in the divisional playoff next weekend against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Looking at where they were at this time a year ago, a lot of uncertainty where Aaron Rodgers was going to go, and they end up, they came in there this year coming in. They had to win their final two games just to qualify for the postseason. The Packers, they end up beating the Bears, and they had to beat Minnesota on New Year's Eve 2 weeks ago. And then the previous week, over a week ago, beat the Chicago Bears, their longtime rival, to qualify for the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, they had to do all of that, and maybe that's why they played with so much confidence and momentum in Dallas. And, it's a funny thing about postseason football. It's not about X's and O's. It's really about fate. And it's about, the way you're playing and how well you're playing going into that portion of the season. Because there are a lot of teams that go into the playoffs with gaudy records, but aren't playing their best football. And oftentimes they get laid to waste in the postseason. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The Niners are a big, big favorite, as well they should be in this game. But I guarantee you the Packers will go in there undaunted.
I agree, because think about what happened, a similar thing would happen with the Packers more than a decade ago. It was like 13 years ago when Rodgers was at the helm. They had to win their final win out just to get in, and they end up culminating in a Super Bowl win. This is when you had Donald Driver. You had the future Hall of Famer Charles Woodson, the former Oakland Raider, who played his time with the Raiders out here in the Bay Area. And then they end up going in there, beating the Falcons. Then they beat the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. Then they end up going to Atlanta, beat the Falcons down in Georgia. Then they head and beat their longtime nemesis, Chicago Bears, the ugliest rivalry in all of football, beat them in Soldier Field. And you look at in perspective, both franchises have not been the same since that day, or for the Bears since that win. We'll get to your days with the Chicago Bears in a bit when you did play-by-play for the Bears. And then they end up beating the Pittsburgh Steelers in Super Bowl 45.
Yeah, and people, we've been kind of looking at the two teams. This year's team as compared to the team in 2010. They were the last team to get into the playoffs. They were the 6th seed. This team's the last team to get into the NFC playoffs. They're the 7th seed. But the difference is this. The Packers team of 2010 in the preseason was one of the favorites for the Super Bowl. They had a great year at the great second half of the 2009 season, lost a heartbreaking playoff game in Arizona to Kurt Warner and that Arizona team. And they came into the season in 2010 as favorites. Now, they had a wave of injuries unlike anything I'd seen. 16 players, 10 of whom were starters or regular players in the rotation. And by midseason, everyone had pretty much written them off because you don't go to the Super Bowl when you're having that kind of a year from an injury standpoint. But down the stretch, they seemed to catch a little momentum. They still had some very good players left, and they found that a lot of the players who had stepped in, that next man up concept, some of them were better than the players they replaced. And they gained momentum down the stretch, won those last two games over the Giants and Bears, and get into the playoffs and go to Philadelphia, beat the Eagles.
Well,
The
that
Atlanta game
interception was
was
looked like I mean, that when Michael Vick threw that interception, who was the defender for the Packers who picked that ball right into the end zone? Looked like the Eagles was going to score that potential game-winning touchdown. I forgot who it was.
Tremont Williams.
So what? Right. The game of inches. The game of inches. The game of inches was the difference of you guys advancing or who's going to advance on to the next round of the playoffs. That was that tight of a contest, and then you beat the Falcons. Then you go to Soldier Field and beat the Bears, and then you beat the Steelers, a team that won the Super Bowl the 2 years prior.
Well, my point being that that team had a certain pedigree about it, even with all the injuries when they made their playoff march. This is a whole new team, basically.
Right, that's right.
You've got some veterans on defense, but really the youth of that offense is unprecedented. I've never seen a receiving corps put together on the NFL level, and I've only been at it for 46 years, but I've never seen a receiving corps made up of all rookies and second-year players.
Woo!
And their oldest receiver is a second-year player. And so, that having been said, for them to come into the season and do what they've done, and it's not happened overnight. They started out with a win in Chicago. They won 2 of their first 3 games. Then they didn't win a game for 42 days. They lost 4 in a row, and everybody was wondering where they were going to go. And they started to catch fire a little bit down the stretch, and they ended up winning, I believe, 7 of their last 10, and now the playoff game in Dallas. So the maturation of the quarterback, I think the maturation and, more importantly, of his receivers in that receiving corps has made the biggest difference. So this team goes into the playoffs without a whole lot of pedigree to it. This is a very young football team. Matter of fact, youngest in the NFL, youngest to make the playoffs since the 74 Buffalo Bills. So much different situation.
25 is the average. That's our Niners Radio 49 stat of the day, 25. So they kind of, the Packer. Let's talk about that. The Packer way this is going back to the early mid 90s. In fact, I was watching a little bit of documentary of the whole history of the Green Bay Packers. You've been on both sides of the ball with your time with the Chicago Bears and with the Green Bay Packers when the Bears were in that time in the late 80s were winning the NFC Central. The Packers went through some down times in the 80s. They had some pretty good players like Lynn Dickey, James Lawton, the former Stanford star who played collegiately at Stanford, played for the Packers and later played for the with the Raiders and the Buffalo Bills. And then, you had John Jefferson, who they picked up from the San Diego Chargers in that blockbuster trade in 81 because of after an ugly holdout. And then you also had Gary Ellis and those Charger teams or those Packer teams were never really didn't have the defense to compete right up there with either the Bears or the Detroit Lions, nor less the Minnesota Vikings at best, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at best.
Yeah, I mean everything changed in Green Bay when Ron Wolf came in.
Yep,
and
Raiders
hired
executive,
Mike Holmgren, and that changed everything. And from there, the Packers have become one of these franchises that is kind of cutting edge West Coast offense, whatever that means, orchestrated by a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. That's who they are. And that's what they've been for now 3 decades. And at times when they've had good defense, and they've had good defense here, Reggie White, Leroy Butler in the 90s, Dom Capers had some very good defenses with Charles Woodson, Clay Matthews, and some of those guys in the 2009, 2010 era. And when they've had good defenses here, they usually win Super Bowls. And so that's kind of the way it is. And this is a little bit different team, this year, but we're still waiting to see what they do. And it's been a growing experience for this team. There is nothing bad that can happen to it between now and whenever they're finished playing, because they've had one heck of a year of growth here.
Yeah. Youth movement. Hey, they exceeded expectations. I mean, they were the one of the last few teams trying to get that last spot, and they did it. They I was like shocked when I saw on Sunday after I got home from church, and they just like, whoa. I just turned the game. I was like shocked. And then when Prescott threw that interception to Savage for that touchdown, I was like, I was speechless. And like I said, what you do in the regular season don't matter in the postseason. And I don't care who they had back there behind center for the Packers, if it's Brett Favre or if it's or Aaron Rodgers or whoever. The results never changed. The Packers have just had a stranglehold. They have now dominated the Cowboys in 10 of their last 11 games, including beating them 3 times in the playoffs.
It's interesting you mentioned the interceptions and how things change in the playoffs. The Packers, when you look at their mark and what they did during the regular season, 18 takeaways, that was 12th overall. Most of that was fumbles. They had 7 interceptions the entire 17 games. In the last 11 games, they had 3 interceptions. In Dallas, in the first half of that game, they had 2
Plus
interceptions.
two in that giveaway
Things change
ratio.
in a hurry in the playoffs, and you have all these trends in the regular season, and you're saying, okay, this is how the game might go based on these trends, and generally it does not go that way in the playoffs because it's a whole different season.
Yep, and I mean, it's funny. It's funny. Who would have thought both Dallas, the division champ, and the Philadelphia Eagles, who were 10-1 through their first 11 games, and the Niners put a beat down in the city of brotherly love, and the Eagles never recovered. And Dallas, who stole the division from them, ended up figuring out they it was going to be the Niners and Cowboys possibly for the NFC Championship, but you got to give credit to the Packers because they were not awed or were not intimidated of the star in the state of Texas down at AT&T Stadium in Arlington.
No, they weren't. It was quite an atmosphere. I mean, all the stars were out in Texas, and they were ready to go, and the team was too. They came out firing really quickly in that game. But what was very interesting was the first play from scrimmage. Aaron Jones gets the ball on a running play, and he's stuffed for no gain, and the Cowboys are really flying. Next play, Love gets sacked for a 3-yard loss, and again, the Cowboys are just flying. But there's a flag downfield, and it's an illegal contact way downfield on Deron Bland. And what it did was it gave the Packers a fresh set of downs on that opening drive of the game. And from there, they just took off and never looked back. So it's interesting how a small, little, insignificant thing like that can actually change and turn the complexion of a game. The Packers might have gone 3 and out on that opening drive of the game, and it could have been a whole different game from there.
Powerful, Wayne, because on a 3rd and long, and you give them a cheap penalty, and that penalty, vice versa, end up the Packers took advantage of it. They took it and ran with it.
Yeah, I mean that's what a good team has to do. You take advantage of your opportunities because you're not going to get many of them in the playoffs. You're playing against pretty good competition.
Yeah, so I mean, how many Packer fans was out there in Green Bay for that game? They travel all around when it's playoff time.
You know what? There were quite a few, and the only reason I know that is because by the fourth quarter, the stadium had emptied out of Cowboy fans, and there were a bunch of Packers fans left, and they were celebrating, and so there were quite a few of them there in the end. But no, that was a hot ticket in Dallas, and Cowboys fans weren't selling their tickets. Well, let me put it this way: they weren't selling a lot of their tickets.
Right. I think, tickets for that divisional playoff game for out here is about the cheapest is about $300 when the Niners play the Packers. So you better go to a good StubHub ticket broker and don't buy them fake tickets.
Yeah,
I mean, that's your rent money if you have that kind of a disposable income. But your recollections of the 49ers Packer rivalry, you weren't there in 95, 96, 97 when they played the 3 times, or when Brett Favre beat them the first 5 times before the catch 2, right? You weren't there, right?
No, I wasn't there. Yeah, I mean the Packers kind of had their number.
Right,
Interesting about the '90s because I knew the Packers obviously very well, and I followed them because they were in the division that we were in. And in the '90s, the Packers could not get past the Dallas Cowboys,
right.
and that was the team they were going to have to go through to get to their Super Bowl, and they never did. And
A
in
twist of fate.
1996, when the Cowboys and Packers were heading toward a NFC Championship game, the Cowboys went to Carolina and got tripped up by an expansion team, the Carolina Panthers, and Dom Capers was their head coach. And the Panthers, instead of the Cowboys, came to Green Bay for what would have been an epic NFC Championship game. But the Packers, nonetheless, won that game over Carolina and then beat New England in the Super Bowl. But along the way, in the '90s, for whatever reason, Mike Holmgren had San Francisco's number, and they beat the Niners on a number of occasions.
Yep.
Now you go, almost 3 decades later, and the switch is flipped. The Niners have won the last four against the Packers
Five,
and
five.
significantly, knocked them out of the playoffs. So on a number of those occasions.
Well, you think of that. Well, January of '96, 28 years ago, this week, it was the pack. A lot of people thought it was going to be Niners and Cowboys for the fourth straight year. The Niners, Green Bay comes out to Candlestick Park or 3Com Park at Candlestick Point, and they eliminated the reigning Super Bowl champs. This Brett Favre and this Packer team was coming on strong. They would a week later lose to the Cowboys, which Dallas would win their third Super Bowl in 4 years. But you could see the balance of power of that rivalry went from Niners Cowboys to Niners and Packers. The first of would be 5 straight times they would beat them, and then the Niners finally got them back on that divine intervention miracle play by Terrell Owens in that wild card game
Well,
to
and
knock
before
out.
that, the fumble by Jerry Rice. I mean, had there been
Yeah,
replay, as a matter of fact, the replay was installed after that. But had there been replay, that there never would have been a Terrell Owens
I
situation.
agree. That was a fumble. That was a fumble, and it kind of changed the course of the two franchises after that
It
because
did.
Andy Reid ended up going to Philadelphia to turn things around there in Philly, and he had a good success there in the 2000s. Mike Holmgren's last game as head coach, he goes to Seattle. Uh, and then the Niners, with Steve Mariucci, who was on Holmgren's staff, the Niners were against the salary cap, old veterans, and were going through a transitional change as well with Eddie DeBarlo had his legal issues with the riverboat scandal thing. Ended up getting him suspended for a year. Then he ended up after the '99 season, after his suspension was up, he kind of relinquished controls to his sister Denise DeBarlo York. To the Yorks, her husband, Dr. John York, and the team went through a transition. Bill Walsh came back to be the acting general manager. He had to part ways with a lot of the veteran players, including Jerry Rice. Well, Steve Young retired after the '99 season after getting that concussion, and Jerry Rice retired following Jerry Rice left the 49ers after the 2000 season because of salary cap issues, which I was there at his last game at Candlestick where Terrell Owens had 20 catches in that game to set a single game record, an old record set back in 1950, and then that. But then after that, the Niners went through some lean years, and then Harbaugh came in there, and then you was there 11 years ago for that divisional playoff when Kaepernick had that run with that touchdown run, and with the defense with Patrick Willis and Jim Harbaugh that very cold, windy night at Candlestick 11 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of games like that. The Niners have kind of had the Packers' number in the postseason, especially, be it Jim Harbaugh and his group, and they had a great staff in there, and of course Kyle Shanahan now and his outstanding staff. It just this rivalry has ebbs and flows and periods of domination on both sides. We'll see what happens this weekend.
Yeah, and also you got to remember Mike Holmgren. He's a local guy here in San Francisco with the Lincoln High School. Graduated from Lincoln. He also coached high school football at Sacred Heart Cathedral, and and there is a lot of intertwine of this rivalry. The Cheeseheads. I mean, what's that? They have done a great job at renovating Lambeau Field in Green Bay. I mean, it's not even close. It's about a couple hours outside or 90 minutes out. It's far away from Milwaukee, right?
It's about 2 hours from Milwaukee to Lambeau Field. Yeah. And they've done a tremendous job with not only the stadium, but developing a district across the street from the stadium. Yeah, I mean, the success they've had over 30 years, the Packers have invested well in their surroundings and in their team. So, hey, listen, it's a different animal when you don't have one guy or one family that owns the team. You can reinvest in the team and in the community around it. And I
Right.
think the Packers have done a tremendous job with that.
Yep. And Bob Harlan, you have to give him a lot of credit for turning that around. I know he's and for what they did, renovating, and I do a weekly or tailgate show at our 49er tailgate shows at Santa Clara doing pregame. A lot of the fans I've talked to over the years, they do those road trips, and when they hit the Green Bay, they travel. Niner fans do travel. They go to Green Bay. They went for that playoff game a couple years ago, which that was a great game. You know,
Yeah.
and the special teams was the difference of that game, though.
Yep.
And and it was cold, snowy. And people was telling me, Brian, you should go to Green Bay one day. It's a life experience, changing experience, being that cold and in brutal conditions in mid January. I'll never forget. It was like I think it was about 5 years ago, 2018. The Niners was hit by a lot of injuries. Jimmy Garoppolo didn't play that Monday night game against the Packers when he tore his ACL. When Aaron Rodgers led on that comeback on that Monday night, it was in mid-October. It was like 70 or 75 degrees at the beach where I was at, and it was about 40 degrees in Green Bay that evening. So it was about 35 degrees swing. I said, "Wow." It was kind of we get our Indian summer in the late October in the Bay Area, and it was pretty cold fall type in Green Bay though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Hey, listen, I've got to run, but it's been
go
great
ahead.
talking to you and reminiscing about the two franchises. It should hopefully it'll be a good game this weekend.
Right, it should be add to that another that mosaic art to that chapter of that great 49er Green Bay Packer rivalry tradition. Thanks, Wayne, and take care. And we get you guys next year. The NFC North, we do go to Green Bay, by the way, next year. The Niners will go to Green Bay, so we'll hope we get you on again next year. I keep your information on in my files. Thank you.
Sounds great. Take care.
All right, thanks. Take care. That is Wayne Larrivee, the longtime voice of the Green Bay Packers, on our Behind the Enemy segment on Niners Radio 49. And the 49ers will take on the Green Bay Packers in the NFC Divisional Playoff. It will mark for the third time in the last 5 years that these two teams will hook up in the Divisional Playoffs. And to add to another chapter of that great 49er Packer rivalry tradition, you go back to 1995 when the Packers ended the Niners' reign as Super Bowl champs, 27-17, out at 3Com Park at Candlestick Point. What would be the first of 5 straight wins for the Packers versus San Francisco, and then of course, that game, the divisional playoff up in Green Bay a year later when the Packers won that game 35-14 on their way to the franchise's first Super Bowl win since the Vince Lombardi Packers did it back in nearly 3 decades. And then, the NFC Championship a year later at 3Com Park. Then it's T.O., the catch number 2. And then, many playoff memories, the Colin Kaepernick show out at Candlestick 11 years ago, more recently 4 years ago, former 49er, current Miami Dolphin Raheem Mostert setting a 49er playoff record for most rushing yards in the game. And this should be could be a great another barn burner classic in the city of the Bay to add to this chapter of this 49er Green Bay Packer tradition. Check us out on this content on YouTube.com/@Niners Radio 49. youtube.com/@NinersRadio49. Thank you for watching, everybody, this edition of Behind Enemy Lines on Niners Radio 49.